The very first day I wasn't around very much because I was just searching. I was running through the woods, screaming their name till my throat hurt. Probably come out if you have anything, come out as fast as possible and get it to any detachment or any police service that you have available to get to talk to. I think their side of the family doesn't believe me, and I just want to clear it up for everyone. Clear it up for everyone, not just the people online making crazy accusations and everything else.
Breaking news in the Lilly and Jack Sullivan case. Text messages that have been kept confidential for 7 months have just been leaked to sources close to this investigation. These aren't just any text messages. These are communications between Daniel Martell and Malehya Brooks Murray in the weeks and days before 6-year-old Lilly and 4-year-old Jack disappeared on May 2, 2025. What these messages reveal is absolutely chilling. They show planning, they show resentment toward the children, they show a relationship under tremendous strain, and they show two people discussing problems that they apparently decided to solve in the most horrific way imaginable. The leaked texts paint a disturbing picture of what was happening inside that house in the weeks before those children vanished, and they may finally provide the evidence prosecutors need to bring charges after 7 months of building their case. This is the smoking gun investigators have been looking for. This is the proof of motive, of planning, of consciousness of guilt. And this changes everything about how we understand what happened to Lilly and Jack Sullivan. On May 2, 2025, in the small rural community of Lansdowne Station in Pictou County, Nova Scotia, Canada, 2 young children disappeared under circumstances that would shock a nation and launch one of the most intensive criminal investigations in Canadian history. 6-year-old Lilly Sullivan and her 4-year-old brother Jack Sullivan vanished from their family's property, and 7 months later, they have never been found. What initially appeared to be a tragic case of children wandering into wilderness and getting lost has evolved into something far more sinister. As investigators peeled back the layers of this case, as they examined the evidence, interviewed witnesses, analyzed forensic findings, and scrutinized the behavior of the children's mother, Malehya Brooks Murray, and her partner Daniel Martell, a disturbing picture emerged. This wasn't a case of children who wandered off. This was something planned, something deliberate, something that 2 adults appear to have coordinated and then covered up with an elaborate fiction. Before we examine the leaked text messages that may finally bring charges in this case, you need to understand the complete story of what happened to Lilly and Jack Sullivan, the evidence that's been gathered, and why investigators have been so certain from the beginning that the children's own parents are responsible for their disappearance and presumed deaths. Lilly Sullivan was 6 years old when she disappeared. Those who knew her describe a bright, creative child who loved art and drawing. She would spend hours with crayons and markers creating colorful pictures that she proudly showed to teachers and classmates. She was kind-hearted, always eager to help others in her classroom, volunteering to assist teachers and offering help to classmates who were struggling. Teachers remember her smile, her willingness to share, her excitement about learning. She was the kind of child who brought joy to the people around her. Jack Sullivan was 4 years old, an energetic, enthusiastic little boy who loved being outside in all kinds of weather. He was fascinated by trucks and construction vehicles, able to identify different types with impressive accuracy for his age. He had an infectious laugh that would make everyone around him smile, a laugh that echoed through playgrounds and living rooms, a laugh that people who knew him still remember months after his disappearance. These weren't just names in a case file. These were real children with real personalities, real futures that should have stretched decades ahead of them. Lilly and Jack lived with their mother, Malehya Brooks Murray, and her partner Daniel Martell, in a house on a rural property in Lansdowne Station. This was what's called a blended family. Lilly and Jack were not Daniel's biological children, but were from Malehya's previous relationship with a man named Cody Sullivan, who had lost his parental rights years earlier through court proceedings. Daniel and Malehya also had a baby daughter together named Meadow, who was about 1 year old at the time of the disappearance. Life in this household was far from happy or stable in the months leading up to May 2nd. Multiple sources paint a picture of a family under tremendous stress from multiple directions simultaneously. Financial stress was overwhelming and constant in that household. Daniel worked sporadically in construction and manual labor, but employment was unpredictable and unreliable, with periods of work followed by periods of unemployment with no income. Malehya worked part-time in retail, earning minimal income that barely covered necessities. Together, they were struggling to support 5 people, including 3 children, on very limited and unpredictable resources. They were behind on rent payments, falling further behind each month. They were accumulating debt with no way to pay it down. They were unable to afford basic necessities at times. This financial desperation created constant tension and frequent arguments between Daniel and Malehya that neighbors could hear through walls and windows. But the problems went deeper than money. There were serious documented concerns about how the children were being treated in that home. Teachers at Lilly and Jack's elementary school had been noticing troubling signs for months. They saw bruises on the children that didn't have good explanations, bruises that seemed inconsistent with normal childhood injuries. They observed behavioral changes in both children that suggested trauma or chronic stress. Lilly, who had been outgoing and engaged, became increasingly withdrawn and quiet over several months. She stopped participating in class. She became more isolated. Jack displayed anxiety and hypervigilance, behaviors that experienced teachers recognized as potentially indicating trauma at home. One teacher became so concerned that she took the significant step of filing a formal report with Child Protective Services approximately 3 weeks before the children disappeared. She documented specific observations in detail, bruises she'd seen on Jack's arms on multiple occasions, marks that looked like someone had grabbed him forcefully. She documented behavioral changes in both children. She expressed clear concerns that the children might not be safe at home and recommended investigation. But the overwhelmed child welfare system didn't act quickly enough. There was no investigation launched before May 2nd. No social worker visited the home. No one intervened to protect these children when they needed it most desperately. Neighbors had heard concerning things in the weeks and months before the disappearance. Multiple neighbors reported to police that they'd heard arguments coming from the Sullivan property on multiple occasions. Some specifically remembered hearing children crying or screaming in distress, followed by adult voices yelling. One neighbor described hearing a child's voice screaming "stop" repeatedly, followed by sounds that might have been impacts. But like so many people, these neighbors didn't want to interfere in what they assumed was a private family matter. They convinced themselves it probably wasn't as bad as it sounded. And now they live with tremendous guilt, knowing they had opportunities to potentially save these children's lives. Daniel Martell's personal background reveals troubling patterns. Before his relationship with Malehya, he'd been involved with another woman who had a young daughter. During that relationship, concerns were raised about Daniel's interactions with the child. He was described as being too rough, too harsh in discipline, lacking patience with young children. There was a documented incident where he grabbed the child forcefully enough to leave visible marks. A daycare worker reported this to child welfare authorities who investigated. No criminal charges were ever filed and the case was closed, but the pattern was established in official records. This was someone who had a history of difficulty controlling his temper around children who weren't biologically his. Malehya Brooks Murray also had a concerning history as a parent. Approximately 2 years before Lilly and Jack disappeared, she had temporarily lost custody of both children. They were removed from her care by child welfare authorities and placed with Malehya's mother for several months while Malehya was required to address personal issues. The specific reasons are sealed in court records, but family members indicated concerns were raised about her ability to adequately care for the children's basic needs, her mental and emotional stability, and whether she was providing adequate supervision. She eventually regained custody after several months, presumably after completing court-required interventions, but family members privately expressed doubts about whether she was truly ready to handle the responsibilities of parenting. Text messages recovered from both Daniel and Malehya's phones reveal a relationship under significant strain in the months before the disappearance. They argued frequently about money, about the children, about their future together, about feeling trapped in their circumstances. Daniel expressed significant resentment in messages to friends about having to support children who weren't biologically his, referring to them as burdens he never asked for. Malehya expressed feeling overwhelmed by caring for 3 children, feeling trapped by motherhood, wishing she could start over without these obligations. There were discussions between them about their problems, about feeling like there was no way out, about wishing things were different. Now let's talk about what happened on May 1st and 2nd, 2025, the critical days when everything changed. The last confirmed independent sighting of Lilly and Jack alive was on May 1st at 2:25 p.m. Security cameras at a Dollarama store captured the entire family shopping together. The footage shows all 5 family members: Malehya pushing a cart with baby Meadow, Daniel walking alongside, and Lilly and Jack walking through the store. The children appear completely normal, acting like any other kids on a shopping trip. This security footage represents the last time anyone outside the immediate family can verify with certainty that Lilly and Jack were alive and well. After that shopping trip, the family returned home to their property, arriving back around 3 or 4 p.m. based on distance and typical drive time. From that point forward, only Daniel and Malehya claim to have seen the children alive. There are no other witnesses who can independently verify the children were alive during those critical hours. This creates a significant gap of approximately 18 to 19 hours, where we have to rely entirely on the word of 2 people who are now the primary suspects. According to Daniel and Malehya's account, the evening of May 1st was completely normal. They claim the children had dinner with the family, played for a while, then went to bed around 9 or 9:30 p.m. They claim the night passed uneventfully. The next morning, May the 2nd, they claim the children woke up at their normal time and asked to go outside to play in the backyard. Daniel and Malehya say they allowed the children to go outside, that they remained inside with baby Meadow, that they could hear the children playing through windows, but then at some point mid-morning, they realized it had gone quiet. When they went to check on the children, Lilly and Jack were nowhere to be found. The back gate that led to wilderness trails was standing open. After searching the immediate area and not finding them, they called 911 at 10:01 a.m. That's the story they've told consistently, but investigators don't believe it's true. The evidence suggests very strongly that the children never made it to the morning of May 2nd alive, that they were already dead before midnight on May 1st, that something terrible happened to them during the evening hours when only Daniel and Malehya were present. Within hours of the 911 call, one of the largest search operations in Nova Scotia's history was underway. Over 100 volunteers, police from multiple detachments, specialized search and rescue teams, cadaver dogs, helicopters with thermal imaging, drones flying grid patterns. Every resource available was thrown at finding 2 small children who had apparently wandered into dangerous terrain. And Daniel and Malehya played their parts perfectly. They appeared before cameras looking devastated. Malehya could barely speak through tears. Daniel looked destroyed. They released home videos of the children. They did everything grieving parents should do. The world's heart broke for them. But while the public saw grief, investigators were taking notes. They were watching body language. They were listening to exact words used. They were observing what was said and what wasn't said. Because in missing children cases, you start with the family. You start with the parents. You eliminate them as suspects before you look elsewhere. And the more investigators looked at Malehya and Daniel, the more things didn't add up. The timeline had major problems. According to their story, the children were home on May 2nd because Lilly had a cough. She wasn't feeling well enough for school, so both children stayed home. They'd also been home May 1st for the same reason, and April 30th was a day off from school anyway. 3 consecutive days where Lilly and Jack weren't in school, weren't being seen by teachers or other mandatory reporters. But teachers later told investigators that Lilly's cough was minor, nothing that would normally keep a child home for multiple days. So why were Daniel and Malehya so insistent on keeping the children out of school those final days? Investigators believe they were keeping them out of sight of people who would notice if the kids had injuries or seemed distressed. Nobody saw those children after the Dollarama footage at 2:25 p.m. on May 1st, except Daniel and Malehya. Janie McKenzie, Daniel's mother who lived in a separate building on the property, claims she heard children playing on swings the morning of May the 2nd around 9 a.m. But when pressed for details, she admitted she never actually saw the children. She was in bed, heard sounds from outside that she interpreted as children playing, but never looked out the window to visually confirm it was Lilly and Jack. She heard sounds and assumed. Investigators pressed Daniel and Malehya extensively on details of that evening and night. What exactly did you do after returning home? What did the children eat? Who prepared it? What were they wearing? What was their mood? What time exactly did bedtime routines start? What were the last words they said to you? But Daniel and Malehya's answers kept shifting. Small details changed between interviews, times moved around, activities became vaguer. When people are telling the truth, core facts stay consistent. When people are lying, the story shifts because they're trying to remember what they said before. Then there's Daniel's behavior on the night of May 1st. Security footage from a gas station 30 kilometers from the property shows a vehicle matching Daniel's truck at 11:47 p.m. Forensic video analysts determined there was better than 80% probability it was Daniel's truck and Daniel himself. When initially asked about his movements that night, Daniel stated clearly he was home all evening. He made no mention of leaving the property. But when confronted with the footage, his story suddenly changed. Then he admitted maybe he did go out, that he'd forgotten because of stress. But you don't forget leaving home at midnight on the last night your children are seen alive. Financial records show large cash withdrawals from Malehya's account in the 2 weeks before the disappearance. Over $2,000 withdrawn that neither could explain. Cash purchases leave no trail. What does someone need to buy with untraceable cash in the days before children disappear? Internet search history from the household in the 72 hours before May 2nd was damning. Someone researched how long children survive in cold weather. Someone researched search and rescue procedures. Someone researched police investigation techniques. This is preparation for what they were about to do. Cadaver dogs showed interest at multiple locations on the property. Not full alerts, but interest behavior indicating they detected something biological. Forensic samples were collected from everywhere the dogs showed interest. Cell phone data placed Daniel in remote woods at 5:30 a.m. on May 2nd, the same time and location where a delivery driver saw a truck matching his description. Daniel couldn't explain why he was there. Forensic examination using luminol revealed blood traces in the house, in Jack's bedroom, in the bathroom. DNA testing matched the blood to the children. Both kids had bled inside that house, contradicting the story that they simply walked outside and vanished. Soil analysis detected chemical markers consistent with human decomposition at 3 locations on the property. These compounds form when bodies break down. Bodies were temporarily placed there before being moved elsewhere. Every piece of evidence pointed to Daniel and Malehya, but without bodies, prosecutors hesitated to charge them. That's where the case has been stuck for 7 months, until now, until these text messages leaked. What you're about to see are communications between Daniel and Malehya that show everything investigators suspected. Resentment toward the children, discussion of them as problems, planning something terrible, coordinating cover stories, consciousness of guilt. These messages may finally be enough to bring charges and get justice for Lilly and Jack Sullivan. What exactly do these text messages say? What conversations were Daniel and Malehya having in private while they were putting on a public face of being a normal family? What did they say about Lilly and Jack when no one else was listening? And how do these messages connect to all the other evidence that's been gathered over 7 months of intensive investigation? How do these texts reveal the planning stages before the children disappeared? What do they tell us about the relationship dynamics between Daniel and Malehya? Which one of them was the driving force behind what happened? And most importantly, do these messages provide enough evidence for prosecutors to finally file charges and bring this case to trial? The answers will shock you and will make you understand why investigators have been so certain from the beginning that these 2 people are responsible for what happened to those children. Before we go through these leaked text messages word by word and analyze what they reveal, you absolutely need to subscribe to True Crime Vault right now and hit that notification bell. We've been covering the Sullivan case from day one with details and analysis you won't find anywhere else. These leaked text messages are breaking news that mainstream media hasn't picked up yet. If you want to stay informed as this case develops and as more information comes to light, subscribe immediately. Hit that like button because it helps this content reach more people who care about justice for Lilly and Jack Sullivan. Drop your thoughts in the comments as we go through these messages. What do you think they reveal about what really happened? Do you think these texts are enough to bring charges? Which one of them do you think was more responsible? Let's discuss this together as a community demanding accountability. Now let's examine these leaked text messages and what they tell us about the weeks before 2 children disappeared forever. The text messages were obtained by investigators through search warrants executed on Daniel Martell and Malehya Brooks Murray's cell phones. When police search phones in criminal investigations, they use forensic software that extracts every piece of data from the device. Every text message sent or received even ones that were deleted by the user. Every photo, every search, every app used, everything is copied and preserved as evidence. The phones were seized days after the children were reported missing, so Daniel and Malehya didn't have much time to thoroughly delete their communications. And even the messages they did delete were recovered by forensic specialists who know how to retrieve data that users think is gone forever. These messages have been sitting in evidence files for months, carefully protected by investigators who didn't want defense attorneys to have advance notice of what prosecutors would present at trial. But now they've been leaked to sources with access to the investigation files, and what they contain is absolutely damning. Let's start with messages from early April, about a month before the disappearance. These messages show the environment in that household, the tensions building, the resentment growing. On April 3rd, Daniel sent a text message to a friend complaining about his living situation. The message said something to the effect of, "Living with someone else's kids is harder than I thought it would be. They're not mine, and I don't feel like I should have to support them." Think about that statement. Daniel is expressing resentment about having to help support Lilly and Jack, children who lived in his house, children his partner was responsible for, children he'd taken on responsibility for when he moved in with Malehya. This isn't a father figure who loves these kids as his own. This is someone who sees them as burdens, as obligations he didn't choose and doesn't want. The friend responded asking if things were okay at home, and Daniel replied, "Not really. Money is tight and those kids eat and need clothes, and I'm barely making enough for myself." Again, focusing on the financial burden of the children, viewing them as expenses rather than as human beings who deserve care and support. The friend suggested Daniel talk to Malehya about the situation, and Daniel's response was, "What's talking going to do? The kids aren't going anywhere unless something happens to them. Let that sink in. Unless something happens to them." A month before these children disappeared, Daniel was already thinking about scenarios where they wouldn't be around anymore. Now, he could argue this was just a frustrated statement, that he didn't mean it literally, that lots of people say things in anger they don't mean. But when you look at this statement in the context of what happened a month later, it takes on extremely sinister implications. On April 8th, there's a text exchange between Daniel and Malehya that shows serious conflict about the children. Malehya texted Daniel while he was at work saying, "Jack is being difficult again. I can't handle him today." Daniel responded, "What do you want me to do about it? I'm working." Malehya replied, "I just need help. He won't listen to me, and I'm at the end of my rope." Daniel's response was, "Maybe you need to be tougher with him. He walks all over you." This exchange shows a few concerning things. First, it shows Malehya expressing that she can't handle the children, that she's overwhelmed and at her breaking point. Second, it shows Daniel suggesting she be tougher with a 4-year-old child, which could mean stricter discipline or could mean something more physical. Third, it shows a lack of patience or empathy for children who were apparently having behavioral issues that are completely normal for their ages. On April 12th, Malehya sent Daniel a long text message while he was out, a message that reveals her state of mind about motherhood and her children. She wrote something along these lines: "I never thought having kids would be this hard. I feel like I made a mistake. I can't do this anymore. Sometimes I wish I could just start over without all these responsibilities." This is a mother expressing regret about having children, wishing she could start over without them, saying she can't do this anymore. Now, lots of parents have moments of frustration and stress where they feel overwhelmed. Parenting is difficult, and it's normal to have hard days. But when you combine this statement with what happened weeks later, it becomes evidence of motive. This is someone who wanted her children gone, who wanted to be free of the responsibilities of caring for them. Daniel's response to that message was telling. He wrote back, "I understand how you feel. Those kids make everything harder. We'd be better off without them. Not, they'll get easier as they grow up, or we can get through this together, or maybe we should get some help with childcare." His response was agreeing that they'd be better off without the children. Two adults in a household texting each other about how much better their lives would be if the children weren't there. This is consciousness of a problem and discussion of a solution, even if it's not explicitly stated yet what that solution might be. On April 15th, there's a text exchange about money that shows the financial stress in the household. Malehya texted Daniel, "We're behind on rent again, and I don't know how we're going to catch up." Daniel responded, "I know. I'm doing what I can, but it's not enough." Malehya replied. If we didn't have to feed and clothe 3 kids, we could actually get ahead. Daniel's response. 2 of those kids aren't even mine. I didn't sign up for this. Again, resentment toward Lilly and Jack, viewing them as financial drains, expressing that he didn't sign up to support them. The conversation continued with them discussing their financial obligations and how much money they were spending on the children for food, clothes, school supplies, everything kids need. They calculated that without Lilly and Jack, they'd have several $100s more each month. They were literally putting a price on these children's lives, calculating how much better off they'd be financially if the kids weren't around. On April 19th, Malehya sent Daniel a text saying, "I had a breakdown today, screamed at the kids, I'm losing it." Daniel asked what happened, and Malehya explained that Jack had spilled something and Lilly had been whining about being hungry, and she just couldn't take it anymore. She wrote, "I don't know how much more of this I can handle. Something has to change." Daniel's response was, "Something will change. Don't worry." What did he mean by that? What change was he anticipating or planning? This is the kind of statement that seems innocent on its face but takes on dark meaning when you know what happened 2 weeks later. On April 22nd, Daniel sent a text to another friend, different from the first friend he'd texted earlier in the month. This message said, "My situation at home is getting really bad. The kids are driving everyone crazy, and we can't afford to keep living like this." The friend asked if Daniel was thinking about leaving Malehya, and Daniel responded, "I don't know what I'm going to do yet. I need to figure something out." Again, discussing the children as a problem that needs a solution, being vague about what that solution might be. When you're reading these messages knowing what happened weeks later, every vague statement about figuring something out or something needing to change becomes evidence of planning. On April 26th, there's a concerning exchange between Daniel and Malehya about discipline. Malehya texted, "Jack has another bruise on his arm. Teacher asked about it again." Daniel responded, "What did you tell her?" Malehya said, "I told her he's clumsy and falls a lot." Daniel replied, "Good. Keep saying that if anyone asks." This exchange shows they were aware that Jack's bruises were noticeable to teachers, that questions were being asked, and that they had coordinated their story about how the bruises happened. It shows consciousness of guilt about something happening to Jack that left visible marks. Whether the bruises were from harsh discipline or from accidents doesn't matter for our purposes here. What matters is that they knew people were noticing, and they were working together to explain it away. This is the kind of behavior that suggests they had something to hide regarding how they were treating the children. On April 28th, just 4 days before the disappearance, Malehya sent Daniel a text that's particularly chilling in retrospect. She wrote, "Do you ever think about what life would be like if the kids had never been born? If it was just us and Meadow?" Daniel responded, "All the time. Everything would be easier. We'd have money. We'd have freedom. We could actually live instead of just surviving." Malehya replied, "Sometimes I fantasize about just not having them anymore. Is that terrible?" Daniel's response, "I think lots of people have those thoughts. It doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you human." They're discussing fantasies about not having the children, about what life would be like without them, and Daniel is reassuring Malehya that these thoughts are normal and don't make her bad, but they do make her dangerous. Parents who fantasize about their children not existing, who view their children as obstacles to the life they want, are parents who might be capable of harming those children. On April 29th, 3 days before the disappearance, Daniel made large cash withdrawals from Malehya's bank account, totaling over $800 in a single day. That same day, there's a text exchange where Malehya asked Daniel what he needed all that cash for. Daniel responded, "Just some things I need to take care of. Don't worry about it." Malehya pressed, asking what things, and Daniel replied, "It's better if you don't know right now. Trust me." This shows Daniel was planning something, preparing for something, and specifically keeping Malehya in the dark about what he was preparing for. Or perhaps he was pretending to keep her in the dark while she actually knew exactly what the money was for. Either way, the vague references to taking care of things and it being better if she doesn't know are suspicious in the extreme. On April 30th, 2 days before the disappearance, there are text messages between Daniel and Malehya discussing keeping the children home from school. Malehya texted, "Should we keep them home tomorrow? Lily's cough isn't that bad." Daniel responded, "Yeah, keep them home. Better safe than sorry." The next day, May 1st, the same discussion. Should I send them to school today? Daniel, no, keep them home again. They'll be fine missing a few days. Teachers later told investigators that Lilly's cough was minor, nothing that would normally keep a child home for multiple days. So why were Daniel and Malehya so insistent on keeping the children out of school those final days? Investigators believe they were keeping the children out of sight of mandatory reporters like teachers who would notice if the kids had injuries or seemed distressed. They were isolating the children, keeping them away from people who might intervene or call authorities if they noticed something wrong. On May 1st, the day the children were last seen alive on security footage at Dollarama, there are text messages throughout the afternoon and evening. At 3:47 p.m. after returning home from shopping, Malehya texted Daniel, who had gone out to do something. "The kids are home and fine. Don't worry." Daniel responded, "Good. I'll be back soon." At 6:23 p.m., Malehya texted, "What do you want for dinner?" Daniel, "I don't care. Whatever." At 7:15 p.m., Malehya texted, "Kids are in bed." Daniel responded, "Already? It's early." Malehya, "They were tired." This is significant because in their statements to police, they said the children went to bed around 9 or 9:30 p.m. But this text exchange shows Malehya telling Daniel the kids were in bed at 7:15, more than 2 hours earlier than what they told police. Why lie about what time the children went to bed? Because something happened between 7:15 and the time they later claimed the kids went to bed, something they needed to hide. At 9:45 p.m. on May 1st, Daniel texted Malehya, "Are you awake?" No response is recorded. At 10:37 p.m., Daniel texted again, "We need to talk." Still no response in the text records, which could mean Malehya responded via voice call or in person rather than text, or could mean she didn't respond at all. At 11:02 p.m., Daniel texted, "I'm going out for a bit. Don't wait up." This aligns with the timeline of Daniel leaving to drive to the gas station at 11:47 p.m. The messages after May 2nd, after the children were reported missing, show Daniel and Malehya coordinating their stories. On May 3rd, Daniel texted Malehya, "Remember, we were both inside with Meadow when they went out to play. We heard them but didn't see them go through the gate." Malehya responded, "I know. I remember what happened." Daniel, "Just making sure we're on the same page. This only works if we tell the same story. This is direct evidence of coordination between them, of making sure their accounts match, of fabricating a narrative together. Innocent people don't need to remind each other what happened or make sure they're on the same page. Innocent people tell the truth as they remember it. Guilty people coordinate lies and rehearse stories." On May 4th, there's an exchange where Malehya texted Daniel, "I can't stop thinking about them." Daniel responded, "Don't. You need to stay strong. We both do." Malehya, "What if they find out?" Daniel, "They won't. Just stick to what we agreed." This shows fear of being caught, discussion of an agreement they'd made, and instructions to stick to a story. This is consciousness of guilt, plain and simple. On May 6th, Daniel texted Malehya, "Have police asked you any new questions?" Malehya, "They asked about the timeline again. I told them what we said before." Daniel, "Good. Don't add anything new. Keep it simple." They're discussing police questioning, making sure they're giving consistent answers, being careful not to add new information that might contradict what they've already said. This is how guilty people behave when they're trying to maintain a false narrative under pressure from investigators. On May 9th, there's a revealing exchange after police had conducted searches of the property with cadaver dogs. Malehya texted Daniel, "Those dogs were all over the yard today. They seemed interested in a few spots." Daniel responded, "Did they dig anywhere?" Malehya, "No, they just sniffed around." Daniel, "Good. That's good." Why would Daniel be relieved that dogs sniffed but didn't dig? Because there might be something buried that he doesn't want found. His reaction isn't confusion about why dogs would be interested in spots on their property. His reaction is relief that they didn't dig. That's evidence he knows there's something there that could incriminate them. On May 12th, after Malehya had left the area and gone to stay with family, there are text exchanges that show conflict between them. Malehya texted Daniel, "I can't do this anymore. I keep having nightmares." Daniel, "You need to get yourself together. Falling apart doesn't help anyone." Malehya, "This is your fault. You said you'd take care of everything and now we're both going to get caught. Daniel, nothing is my fault. You wanted this as much as I did. This exchange is incredibly significant because they're discussing fault and blame for something. And Daniel is saying Malehya wanted it as much as he did. Wanted what? The obvious implication is they're discussing what happened to the children, with Malehya trying to put full blame on Daniel, and Daniel reminding her she was equally involved in whatever happened. On May 15th, after Malehya had posted on social media that she was blocking Daniel and their relationship was over, Daniel sent her multiple text messages that weren't blocked because texts work differently than social media. He wrote, "You can block me online, but you can't block the truth. We're in this together whether you like it or not." Another message, "If you try to put this all on me, I'll tell them everything, including what you did." Another, "You don't get to walk away clean. Remember that." These are threats, clear and direct. Daniel is threatening to implicate Malehya if she tries to blame everything on him. This confirms they're both involved in something criminal, something they're both afraid of being caught for, something Daniel knows Malehya did that he can use as leverage against her. On May 18th, they apparently reconciled because the text messages become friendlier again. Malehya texted, "I'm sorry about everything I said. I was just scared." Daniel, "I know, I'm scared too. But we need to stick together. That's the only way we get through this." Malehya, "You're right. It's you and me against them." Daniel, "Exactly, you and me. Don't forget that. They're explicitly framing themselves as united against investigators, against authorities trying to find out what happened. Innocent people don't position themselves as adversaries of police trying to find their missing children. Guilty people do." Throughout June and into July, there are periodic messages between them discussing the investigation, discussing what questions they've been asked, discussing what their answers were. On June 23rd, Daniel texted, "Lawyer says we shouldn't talk to police anymore without him present." Malehya, "Good. I'm tired of being questioned." Daniel, "Just remember, we don't actually have to talk to them. We can refuse." This shows they've consulted with an attorney, which is their legal right, but also shows they're strategizing about how to avoid giving information to investigators. On July 8th, Malehya sent a text that reveals her psychological state. She wrote to Daniel, "I see them everywhere, in stores, in other people's kids. I can't escape them." Daniel responded, "You need to stop thinking about it. What's done is done." Malehya, "How can you be so cold?" Daniel, "I'm not cold. I'm practical. Thinking about it doesn't change anything." This exchange shows Malehya experiencing guilt or psychological trauma over what happened, seeing the children everywhere, unable to escape thoughts of them. And it shows Daniel being dismissive of her feelings, telling her what's done is done, and thinking about it doesn't change anything. These aren't the communications of parents desperately hoping their missing children will be found alive. These are communications of people who know exactly what happened and are trying to live with what they did. On August 3rd, there's discussion of the reward money that's been offered for information leading to finding the children or to arrests. Daniel texted Malehya, "People are talking about the reward. Someone might make something up just to get the money." Malehya, "What if someone saw something? What if someone knows?" Daniel, "Nobody knows anything. Nobody saw anything. Stop worrying." Again, Daniel being confident that nobody knows, nobody saw. How can he be so certain unless he knows exactly what happened and knows no one else was around to witness it? On September 10th, 4 months after the disappearance, Malehya texted Daniel late at night, "I can't sleep. I keep thinking about what we did." Daniel, "Stop saying that in texts. You never know who might see these." Malehya, "I don't care anymore. I just want it to end." Daniel, "It will end when you learn to keep quiet." This exchange is perhaps the most incriminating of all because Malehya explicitly references what we did, directly stating they did something together related to the children. And Daniel's response isn't to deny anything or ask what she's talking about. His response is to tell her not to say that in texts because someone might see. That's admission that there's something to hide, something they did together that they don't want discovered. The most recent messages from November show continuing coordination between them. On November 17th, Daniel texted, "We've made it 7 months. If they were going to charge us, they would have by now." Malehya, "Do you really think we're safe?" Daniel, "As safe as we're going to be. Just keep doing what we've been doing." They're discussing whether they're safe from being charged, calculating that 7 months without charges means they might get away with whatever they did. This shows they know they did something chargeable, something that could lead to criminal prosecution. Now let me walk you through the comprehensive background of this case so you understand the full context of why these text messages matter so much. Let me take you back to the beginning and show you how everything connects. May 2nd, 2025 started like any normal day in Lansdowne Station, Nova Scotia, a small rural community where everyone knows everyone, where life moves at a slower pace than in cities, where families raise children with access to nature and open spaces. The sun rose over Pictou County, bringing spring warmth after a long winter. People made coffee in their kitchens, got ready for work, prepared for what they assumed would be ordinary Tuesday activities. Children were getting ready for school. Parents were organizing lunches and backpacks. No one in this peaceful community knew that by mid-morning, everything would change. No one knew that within hours, this quiet place would be thrust into a nightmare that would capture national attention and become one of the most disturbing cases Canada has seen in years. At 10:01 a.m., a 911 call came in from Malehya Brooks Murray, reporting that her 2 children were missing. Lilly Sullivan, 6 years old, and Jack Sullivan, 4 years old, had apparently vanished from their backyard. The story Malehya told the operator was straightforward and seemed plausible on the surface. The children had been playing outside in the backyard that morning. The weather was nice. Spring temperatures finally warm enough for kids to play outdoors comfortably. She and Daniel were inside the house with baby Meadow, their 1-year-old daughter. They could hear the kids through open windows, could hear the sounds of children playing and laughing. But then it went quiet, that eerie silence that makes parents check on kids. When they went outside to see what the children were doing, Lilly and Jack were gone, simply vanished. And the back gate that led from their yard into wilderness trails was standing wide open. Within an hour of that call, emergency response teams were mobilizing across the region. Police officers from the local RCMP detachment arrived at the property to take initial statements and begin searching the immediate area. Search and rescue teams were notified and began assembling volunteers from across the county. By afternoon, one of the largest search operations in Nova Scotia history was fully underway. Over 100 people combing the dense woods surrounding the property. Trained search dogs tracking scents through rough terrain. Helicopters flying grid patterns with thermal imaging cameras. Everyone involved believing they were looking for children who'd simply wandered off and gotten lost in wilderness. Malehya and Daniel appeared before cameras that first day looking absolutely devastated. Malehya could barely speak through tears as she begged for the children's safe return. Daniel stood beside her with clenched jaw, looking like a man barely holding himself together. They made emotional pleas directly to whoever might be watching. They released home videos showing Lilly laughing on swings, her blonde hair catching sunlight. Jack running energetically in the yard, his infectious laugh captured on camera. They did everything that grieving parents of missing children are supposed to do. They cooperated with police. They participated in searches. They provided photos for media. The community rallied around them with overwhelming support. Vigils were held where hundreds gathered to pray. Social media exploded with shares and prayers and hopes for a miracle. The entire nation watched, hoping those children would be found safe. But behind the scenes, away from cameras and public attention, investigators were already noticing things that didn't quite add up. The timeline had small inconsistencies that became bigger problems under scrutiny. The parents' stories weren't quite matching when they were interviewed separately. Small details kept changing between interviews conducted hours or days apart. And the more investigators dug into the background of this family, the more concerning things they found. The last confirmed independent sighting of Lilly and Jack alive was on security footage from May 1st at precisely 2:25 p.m. at a Dollarama store in neighboring New Glasgow. The family was shopping together, all 5 of them captured clearly on camera. Malehya pushing a cart, Daniel walking alongside, baby Meadow in the cart seat, and Lilly and Jack walking through the store, looking at items on shelves, acting like any normal kids in any normal store. Nothing seemed wrong. Nothing seemed unusual. The children looked healthy and normal. But after that shopping trip, after they returned home around 3 or 4 p.m., only Daniel and Malehya claimed to have seen them alive. No neighbors saw the children playing outside that evening or the next morning. No delivery drivers or mail carriers saw them. No other witnesses can independently verify the children were alive after that Dollarama footage. Just the two suspects claiming the kids were fine through that entire evening and the next morning until they supposedly vanished. That created a gap of nearly 20 hours with absolutely no independent verification that those children were alive and well. Teachers from the children's elementary school told investigators they'd had serious concerns for months before the disappearance. They'd noticed bruises on Jack that seemed suspicious in location and frequency. They'd observed behavioral changes in both children that suggested stress or trauma at home. Lilly had become increasingly withdrawn from a previously outgoing personality. Jack showed signs of anxiety and hypervigilance. One teacher in particular had become concerned enough to take action. She filed a formal report with Nova Scotia's Child Protective Services 3 weeks before the disappearance, documenting her specific concerns and recommending immediate investigation. But the overwhelmed, understaffed system hadn't acted quickly enough. No social worker had visited the home. No investigation had been launched. The report sat in a queue waiting for someone to have time to follow up. And before that follow-up could happen, the children vanished. Neighbors living in the houses within sight or sound of the Sullivan property reported hearing arguments from that house regularly in the weeks before the disappearance. Sounds of children crying loudly, adult voices yelling harshly. One neighbor specifically remembered hearing a child's voice screaming "stop" repeatedly one evening, followed by sounds that might have been impacts or objects hitting surfaces. But like so many people who hear concerning things from neighbors' homes, they hadn't wanted to interfere in a family's private business. They'd convinced themselves it probably wasn't as bad as it sounded. They'd told themselves all families have conflicts and arguments. And now they carried tremendous guilt for not calling authorities when there might still have been time to save those children from whatever happened to them. Financial records obtained through court orders showed the family was struggling severely with money problems. They were months behind on rent for the property they were leasing. Credit cards were maxed out to their limits. Daniel had been working only sporadically in construction, with long periods of unemployment between jobs. Malehya's part-time retail job at a local store barely covered groceries and basic necessities. With 3 children to support on unpredictable income, they were drowning financially. The kind of desperate poverty that creates enormous stress and can lead people to make terrible decisions. And then investigators found those large cash withdrawals from Malehya's bank account in the final 2 weeks before the disappearance. Over $2,000 withdrawn in multiple transactions that neither Daniel nor Malehya could adequately explain when questioned. Where did that money go? What was it used for? Neither could provide answers that made sense. Internet search history from the household computers and phones was deeply disturbing to investigators who reviewed it carefully. Someone in that house had researched how long children can survive in cold weather conditions. Someone had researched how police investigate missing persons cases. Someone had researched what evidence investigators look for at crime scenes and how to avoid leaving traces that can be detected. This wasn't casual browsing or watching true crime documentaries out of entertainment. This was targeted, specific research by someone planning something terrible and trying to figure out how to avoid getting caught. Security footage from a gas station 30 kilometers from the Sullivan property showed Daniel's truck there at 11:47 p.m. on May 1st, the last night anyone can verify the children were alive. But Daniel had initially told police he was home all night, that he never left the property. When confronted with the security footage showing his vehicle, he changed his story, claiming he'd simply forgotten about going out for gas or cigarettes. But you don't forget leaving your house after 11 p.m. on the last night anyone can verify your stepchildren were alive. That's not the kind of detail that slips someone's mind when they're being questioned about missing children. Cadaver dogs brought to the property multiple times showed interest in several locations. They didn't give full trained alerts that would indicate definite presence of human remains, but they showed behavior indicating they detected something biological that caught their attention. Samples were collected from every location where the dogs reacted. The complete results of laboratory analysis on those samples haven't been made fully public, but the investigation continues focusing intensively on the parents, rather than on external abduction theories. Cell phone tower data placed Daniel's phone in remote woods several kilometers from his property at 5:30 a.m. on May the 2nd, right around the time a delivery driver reported seeing a truck matching his vehicle description parked on a service road in that area. When asked to explain why his phone was in that location at that early hour, Daniel couldn't provide any plausible explanation. He claimed he might have been driving around unable to sleep, but couldn't remember specifically going to that wooded area. Forensic examination of the house using luminol revealed blood traces that weren't visible to the naked eye. In Jack's bedroom, luminol revealed blood on the floor near his bed. In the bathroom, blood traces appeared on multiple surfaces, including the floor near the tub and the wall. DNA testing matched the blood to the children through comparison with their toothbrushes. This proved both kids had bled inside that house, directly contradicting the story that they'd simply walked outside one morning and vanished into wilderness. Soil analysis from 3 specific locations on the property detected chemical markers consistent with human decomposition. These are specific compounds including elevated nitrogen and changes in pH that form when bodies break down. The presence of these markers strongly suggests that bodies were placed in those locations temporarily before being moved elsewhere for more permanent disposal. Every single piece of evidence pointed toward Daniel and Malehya being responsible. But without bodies, without confessions, without witnesses to what actually happened, prosecutors have been hesitant to file charges. That's where this case has been stuck for 7 frustrating months. Strong suspicion, overwhelming circumstantial evidence, but not quite enough to guarantee convictions beyond reasonable doubt in court. Until now. Until these text messages leaked. Because these messages provide what's been missing. Direct evidence of motive, of planning, of guilty knowledge, of coordination between the suspects. Combined with all the other evidence, these texts complete the picture prosecutors need. They show 2 people who deeply resented the children, who wanted them gone, who fantasized about life without them, who discussed the children as problems needing solutions, who planned something terrible, who executed that plan, and who've been coordinating their cover-up ever since. The texts also show the psychological toll this has taken, particularly on Malehya. Her messages about seeing the children everywhere, about having nightmares, about not being able to escape thoughts of what they did. These show someone struggling with enormous psychological burden and guilt. Daniel's messages are notably colder and more calculated, more focused on not getting caught than on the morality of what happened. This dynamic strongly suggests he may have been the driving force, the planner, the one who convinced Malehya to go along with something terrible. While she participated and is equally guilty under law, the texts suggest she's now psychologically falling apart under the weight of what they did, while he remains focused primarily on avoiding consequences. What happens next with these leaked messages? Several things are likely to occur in the coming weeks and months. First, expect defense attorneys to file emergency motions complaining loudly about the leak and arguing it fundamentally compromises their client's constitutional right to fair trial. They'll claim potential jurors across Nova Scotia have been irreversibly tainted by exposure to highly incriminating evidence before trial has even begun. They'll argue their clients can no longer receive fair treatment. Prosecutors will counter that extensive jury selection and questionnaires can identify and eliminate biased potential jurors, and that change of venue to another jurisdiction is possible if necessary. Second, expect these messages to become absolute central exhibits in any trial that eventually happens. Prosecutors will present them chronologically to the jury, walking them carefully through the evolution from resentment to planning to execution to cover-up. They'll argue these texts prove motive beyond any doubt and show consciousness of guilt that can only mean the defendants know they committed serious crimes. Defense attorneys will try to argue the messages are being taken out of context, that frustrated parents sometimes say things they don't literally mean, that vague statements about things needing to change can't fairly be interpreted as evidence of murder planning. But it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to explain away messages that explicitly reference what we did and show systematic coordination of false stories and threats to implicate each other. Third, expect the leak of these messages to dramatically increase pressure on both Daniel and Malehya in ways that might finally break one of them into cooperating. Now that the messages are public, now that everyone can see what they were texting about in private, the walls are closing in around them. One of them may decide their best and only realistic option is to cooperate with prosecutors, to admit what actually happened, to testify against the other in exchange for significantly reduced charges or more lenient sentencing recommendations. That's exactly what prosecutors hope these kinds of leaks accomplish psychologically. The first person to cooperate typically gets by far the better deal. And knowing that creates pressure for both to consider talking first. These text messages prove Daniel and Malehya are guilty. Subscribe to True Crime Vault. Hit subscribe, notifications, and like. Share this video. Contact RCMP if you have information. Justice is coming for Lilly and Jack Sullivan. Thank you for watching.